DeepSeek is distilling off of OpenAI. OpenAI is rich enough to complain, to say, oh, well, that's not good, even though they've trained their models on everything that's out there on the internet without permission. But it's a real moment. It's like it's a shift, or it's an indicator of something. One source actually told me, like a tech person was like, look, this is exciting in a way because it lowers the cost of the AI that's on tap for like founders and people who want to develop new products and new services and things like that. And so it's an opportunity.
It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Senior Business and Technology Correspondent for CBS News, Jo Ling Kent. Welcome back, Jo Ling.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's true. You did know me when I was Andy, because we've known each other for a long time. No, it's all to the good. People will appreciate that. So I wanted to have you on because I've gotten a whole slew of questions about DeepSeek, AI, markets, tech, big tech, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, who could I bring on that is a deep head in this stuff, has spent time in Asia for years and years, and looks at this stuff professionally? And I thought of you. So thank you for coming on. I'm sure you got some of the same stuff. Did anyone ping you being like, hey, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, I mean, people are reaching out, and I'm hearing from sources and stuff like that. But I'm also on parental leave right now. I had a baby about 3 months ago, as you know, and it's been crazy. So I've been like catching up. And it's interesting when you are used to covering the news day to day, and then you kind of consume it week to week. And people have like 1,000 different opinions in the span of like 7 days. And so it's been fun to like track people and be like, oh, you thought this like 5 days ago, now you think this. And so there's just like so much interest in DeepSeek. I was actually kind of surprised.
Well, it's one reason why I wanted to wait a beat, because there was like a flurry of stuff that came out, and then there was some more stuff, and then DeepSeek then turned itself off to anyone who didn't have a Chinese cell phone number, and then a bunch of countries then said, hey, no to DeepSeek. And I think there might be a bill in Congress saying no DeepSeek for government workers, and maybe even more than that. So can you help describe? Well, actually, let's give some. I'll set the table for people who have no idea what I'm talking about, and then you don't go with the art.
Thank you.
No problem. So DeepSeek is a Chinese AI product. Well, actually, it's a company, and then they released a model that is something of like a Chinese version of ChatGPT called R1, and it works very, very well. Some people said it works better than OpenAI's latest models. But the wildest revelations were that it cost a very, very small fraction of what OpenAI spent in training. Allegedly. But then what's wild, Jo Ling, and we can talk about this, there aren't people, I mean, everyone knows, like, take it with a grain of salt, but also people aren't disputing that heavily. They're not like, oh, this is nonsense or full of shit. Like, people are kind of taking that on its face. And then the other thing is that it's open source. And so those two things, and by the way, the lower cost, it means less energy, less computing power, presumably less cost. So this came out, and then people started playing with it and kicking the tires on it. And then it had this massive, maybe I think it produced the biggest stock loss and value loss for one company in history, where Nvidia plummeted, double-digit percentage, was like 12, 15%, something like that, which was very, very significant, because going into that, it was worth, several trillion, 3.6 trillion.
The darling of the market for a long time.
Yeah. So this new development caused everyone to double back and say, wait a minute, Nvidia is selling these chips for a lot of money because they have the stranglehold on the processing chips that are high powered enough to do all of the compute. And so every major company that wanted to develop AI was going to Nvidia and paying really like, through the nose, like whatever Nvidia wanted, um,
Yeah.
which led Nvidia's stock price to go up and up and up. Their chips were selling for tens of thousands of dollars each, even. And the major tech companies were spending a ton. And then DeepSeek came out and said, hey, we kind of produce something that's just as good, for only $6 million for a small fraction of the price. And then the market had this giant, like, wait, what the heck is happening? And there was a bit of a
Yeah.
freak out.
Right. And so basically it like caused all of these tech stocks to go down. And the question was like, for a lot of people, what is the relationship with China? And like, what if you're using it from like a personal standpoint, right? Like, how does it work? And like, what are you handing over at that point, to the Chinese government? And it's like, there was a lot of people out there, waving this flag saying like, look, this is like surveillance and this is bad. You're basically like, there was, discussion of whether or not, the Chinese government is collecting data on people. And if you look at the terms, I mean, it collects a lot of data. DeepSeek does collect a lot of data, like a lot of the other tech companies here in the United States as well, right? Like they have access to other apps and things like that. But it's like the big question from the consumer standpoint was like, well, is there actually fire? You see some smoke. Is there actually some fire there? And so it was interesting to see people like see the market freak out in this way. But, one source actually told me, like a tech person was like, look, this is exciting in a way because it lowers the cost of the AI that's on tap for like founders and people who want to develop new products and new services and things like that. And so it's an opportunity. And thinking about like that market tumble and what happened to the stock market, I was reading Dan Ives from Wedbush, his analysis of these tech companies, and he's been on all of these companies for so long, and he loves to use those sports metaphors and all that. And he's like, he still says like there's still one chip company in the game, right? Like, and it's one company that's actually launching things beyond like a chat bot and like having one LLM, like large language model, chat bot for consumer use is like, that's one thing. It's very important and very lucrative. But it's another thing to think about like all the other stuff that comes with Nvidia. So I don't know. It really was like a wake up call moment, in a lot of ways. Maybe people think like, but it depended on where you were coming from on it, right? Like as always.
Well, certainly if you're this scrappy entrepreneur type, you might be like, ooh, this is going to be good because, the barriers to
Maybe,
entry are a
yeah.
little bit lower and maybe we can use some tools. I talked also to some investment professionals who were looking at this and have covered the tech companies for a while, and that they think that these tech companies have spent bajillions of dollars on,
Billions,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, billions. I mean, that like tens of billions, um, on chips and processing power and infrastructure, to build these large language models in large part, because they wanted it to be this defensible moat. And their concern was that DeepSeek showed that the moat actually is very, very crossable.
Yeah, right. You pop right over.
Yeah, yeah, I can hop right over it. Um,
Yeah.
and one person explained it to me as that. So what OpenAI did is OpenAI took all of these language inputs, and then did like a like gajillion connections and calculations, so that if you ask it a question or reference certain data, then like a certain output would come out. And DeepSeek essentially short circuited all of the guts in the middle and just figured out, okay, what's the input, what's the output, and did that enough time.
That distillation, right?
Yeah, distillation, which so the argument that I find compelling, and I'm very, very eager to hear what you think, was, okay. So you spend $100 billion or whatever it is, on this moat, and then some clever Chinese company says, "Hey, I don't know what's happening inside the moat, but it turns out maybe it's irrelevant because I can figure out the inputs and outputs and distill
Yeah.
what's happening." And there is evidence, by the way, that um, DeepSeek is very much based on ChatGPT. There was
Yeah.
there was a joke I used to tell when where people would ask like how far behind is China from the U.S. In AI, and
Yeah.
the joke answer is 12 hours because they just wake up and see what we did the previous day.
That's It's interesting because I was at this Fortune innovation conference in Hong Kong last year, about a year ago, and Kai-Fu Lee, who used to head up Google China and now is like a big AI investor and leader in China, had a really interesting perspective because for a long time he was like, well, it's probably gonna be like two coexisting ecosystems like parallel to each other developing for different audiences. And now with DeepSeek, that's the first thing I thought of was like, well, I guess that doesn't hold because like now everything is like, if DeepSeek is distilling off of OpenAI is rich enough to complain to say, oh, well, that's not good, even though they've trained their models on everything that's out there on the internet without permission. But it's a real moment. It's like it's a shift, or it's an indicator of something.
Hello, YouTube. Please do hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget, you can ask questions at mailbag@andrewyang.com. See you on the interwebs. Now, I want to pivot to something very personal and small, but it might be important. So you just
Okay.
said, hey, look, OpenAI trained itself on publicly available data, the internet, and
Yeah.
no one really got paid for that.
Yeah, like the New York Times is suing. Like there's all this stuff happening.
yeah, people are suing. So I got a note the other day from my publisher, which was fascinating, which said an unnamed AI company wants to train on your book.
Oh.
And they are offering us not a lot of money, honestly. It was like, a few $1,000s for it to be able to train on your book. And we'll split the money with you 50-50. And so I looked at this and was like, okay, not a lot of money, but it's, not zero. And on one level, I was kind of impressed that the AI company was paying the publisher. That's actually a fairly
And
above
not just like
board.
ripping it off.
Yeah. Because I mean, obviously, my
Right.
books are out there and like they're electronic copies, so
Yeah,
you could just feed it to the AI
exactly.
and call it a day. So the fact that they actually went through the proper channels, and by the way, as an author, when I write a book, there are various rights that you say. It's like, hey, audiobook,
Yeah.
blah 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 blah, but
Europe
nowhere.
rights, Asia rights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but international. But there was nowhere in there that said, hey, and if we feed it to AI, like maybe you get something. So now they're
Did you
kind of
take it?
they're I mean I said sure, because again on my hand I was like kind of impressed that they decided to approach my publisher, that actual money was
Yeah.
changing hands, even though it's like a minor amount. I thought that in my case I would take the money and donate it to a democracy org. I can so I was like, so I won't feel bad like I'm somehow I mean though I'm sure like there are any number of authors who are getting similar notes right now. So like, you can be a little bit happy for those authors getting a little bit of extra money that they weren't expecting, though I'm sure they all also had the sinking feeling in their guts the way I did, which is like, oh, I guess, that's what's happening to my work. It's just going to become one, scintilla of this AI
Right.
model. And that also was a reason why I was like, sure, because I kind of want my book to be in the AI model so that if someone asks them a question that's relevant to my ideas, then like the model might answer, from with my stuff. I mean, that actually makes me kind of
Right.
happy. So
Huh.
you have OpenAI training on all the publicly available information, and maybe even some copyrighted information that that some others may or may not have access to.
Yeah.
And then you have DeepSeek and the Chinese, who, in my view, from what I can tell from the facts, they've built this sort of efficiency layer on top of it, where it's like, okay, I don't know what's going on in all the guts of it, but I can tell if I ask it this, it says that, and then I can make a version of it that is very, very highly efficient and usable and cheaper, and I can make this available at very low cost. I mean, maybe next to nothing. And one of the things that's been unclear to me this whole time has been, let's say that I'm OpenAI and Microsoft, and you spend 80, $100 billion on large language models or other things. Like right now, that's a much higher sum than any revenue that's being realized from these models at present. Like, are there revenues? Yes.
Some.
Yeah, some.
Like some subscription revenue, some, yeah.
Yeah. But like have the revenues caught up to the investment? Not yet.
Right.
And then the argument is like, oh, but it will, it will get there. Like eventually, that this is going to be a very big line item, which on some level,
Maybe like on the enterprise side or something, like on the business
which on
side.
some level I totally agree with. And
Yeah,
by the
yeah.
way, one of the things I'm even like a small investor in a company that does something that's related to this. So when I was running for president, I would say all the time, look, there are 2 million Americans who work in call centers right now. When do you think AI is going to do that job? And then people would think about it. And now, if I ask that question, people are like immediately yesterday. I mean, I talked to the head.
You can't get through to a human anymore.
Or eventually, in the argument I was making before, is like you'll prefer the AI, or you might not be able to tell the difference. I talked to the founder of a major consumer facing company that everyone would have heard of. And he said that they used to have 2,300 people in customer service, and they're trying to get that down to 100.
That's wild. But I think people are feeling that nationwide. And I think that if you look at some of the survey data out there about like how people feel about getting help on like routine stuff, yes, AI can solve a lot of things. And it's, nice to have a chat bot, I guess, if your problem is simple. But like so many people feel like a frustration of like, this is terrible. Like for example, I called a major institution 3 days ago, and it was like I was getting the AI, like all of the prompts and everything, and it was like endlessly frustrating. Like I turned into like an angry monster. I was like, I can't get what I need because only a human can handle it. But I do think that that's going to change and quickly become irrelevant, and like it won't be an issue anymore.
Yeah, so on that level, there are definitely companies that will pay real money for AI that's going to be able to replace 2,000 customer service workers, but the revenue hasn't caught up to the scale of the investment yet.
Right.
There's a lot of hope that it will, a lot of projection that it will, and one of the incentives in this structure, I think that's going somewhat haywire, in my opinion, honestly, is that if Microsoft announces that they invest $80 billion in OpenAI, Microsoft's stock value pops by some larger sum than that. If Meta says, hey, we're going to increase our capital expenditures by $15 billion in AI, their stock pops by more than that. It's like the stock market will now reward anyone for any money they're spending in the space. If you announce, hey, I'm building, it's like, oh, good, you're future proofing yourself. You're going to end up.
I mean, that's definitely the historical trend, right? Like that is exactly what has happened. But like, do you think now with DeepSeek and the development costs being like allegedly like a lot lower, obviously we know what has happened here with OpenAI, but like, do you think that like trend continues for much longer?
And that's really the thing I'm trying to lay out, and I wanted to talk to you about, is I don't think it does continue. Like I think that DeepSeek,
it doesn't make any sense anymore.
Yeah, like DeepSeek has kind of pulled the the veil away, or just pointed out, look, like this emperor's clothes are not on, or aren't great, or don't need to be there, because to me the business case gets so much weaker on so many levels. If you're like, hey, look guys, I'm spending $50 billion on AI and this moat and like computing infrastructure and giant giant data sets, and everyone's like, ooh, yeah, like
you're saying all the right words.
Oh yeah, you're going to control the world. And look, I'm someone who very much believes that incredibly revolutionary tools, data is the new oil. Like I obviously believe all of that stuff, but there is like a time curve, and then there is how much of that money you're going to be able to charge in revenue, for like different actors. And then you have, if the Chinese come and say, hey guys, look, large language model, really whiz bang, great, awesome. Like you can use ours for next to nothing. Computing costs are lower, the energy consumption's lower. And then one of the things I got asked, on CNN when I was talking about this. It's like, oh, won't there be some censorship if it's a Chinese product? Like if you decide to ask the model about Tiananmen Square or whatever. And
Yeah.
I was like, look, for the average consumer in Africa or Latin America or Europe, um, that's not their concern. Like their concern is, can this thing do what I need it to do at the lowest cost possible? And one of the things that is happening too, which you and I can also talk about, is it's like this was DeepSeek until they took it, they made it unavailable. It was the number one app in the App
Yeah.
Store. Americans were downloading it like wild, and the data concerns are very much secondary or tertiary to most consumers. And you can see that with TikTok. I mean, there was like this huge rage in Congress saying, "Oh, we got to get rid of TikTok." It's a
Well, that's exactly what they're doing now with DeepSeek, right? Like there's that LaHood Gottheimer bill, right? That it's the same. Isn't Gottheimer the same person who did the TikTok ban bill, and then it resulted in that like 5-minute ban of TikTok in January? But like, what I want to understand though, like, is when you think about all the things you just said, and you think about like the amount of money that has been made so far on AI. I was just curious, like, do you believe what like the Dan Ives, like investment professionals, like these analyst guys are saying, which is like, look, we kind of touched on it earlier, but basically like bigger AI infrastructure is still like American led, and like DeepSeek doesn't really like change the game in that. Do you buy that? Do you disagree with it? Like,
I'm confused by the case that someone like that's making, because if you have compute infrastructure that enables you to do things that are, that can only be done through having a gajillion servers and and all on
yeah,
that. But then if someone can reverse engineer the product of your work and not have to redo all the calculations and figure it out just based on inputs and outputs, then it doesn't matter what you spend in the middle. If someone can just take input output and say like, ta-da, I figured out, at least what the, because one of the elements of this is that if you ask even the creator of the AI who has all the servers, hey, when I asked the AI this and it gave me this, like why or how did it do that?
yeah.
No one knows. Like whether it's like even if it was my AI,
Right.
like I can't
Right. No, because
necessarily.
you've trained it to figure out the problem for itself.
Yeah, I can't necessarily tell you. And so if the Chinese can do functionally the same thing because of all of the work you've done and you've spent 10 or 50 or $100 billion on it, then like the bigger your spend is, the more you're benefiting both you and them, but they don't have to spend the 50 or $100 billion. Like the business case gets a lot weaker, especially because now you're having this, you're already having what Kai-Fu was proposing, which we all kind of projected and feared and imagined, which is that the West is going to, particularly the U.S., is going to try and set up its own AI universe.
Yeah.
And then China's going to set up its own AI universe. And then there's going to be a giant turf war for other countries. So you would figure the EU would be like, sure, we'll work with the states on this because we don't want to work with China on it. And then my guess would be that Africa is like, screw it, we'll use Chinese AI.
Yeah. I mean, they're taking all that other investment anyways. Yeah.
Have you made a New Year's resolution that's related to eating healthier, being a little bit more fit, losing a little bit of weight? Well, have I got great news for you. Factor meals can help you actually achieve that goal. Imagine fully prepared meals sent to you fresh. I'm good at a lot of things, I will confess, but I'm really crappy at cooking. And Factor makes it so that you can have a completely delicious, awesome meal in the comfort of your own home that's healthy, it's good for you. You know when you eat something and you know it's healthy? That's the experience with Factor. When I ordered it, the Nona's Bolognese, the mustard chicken, they hit the spot. They're quick, they're convenient, they get the job done, and then some. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
Well, then riddle me this then. What happens? Okay, so we have this Stargate factor, right? Like you have President Trump very much, trying to shore up AI investment, and you've got what, $500 billion. Sam Altman standing there next to the president at the White House. Where does that help? Do you think? Like, does that actually like further, or is it just like digging more into the current positioning of U.S. AI, companies and just it's
Here's
marginal.
here's my instinct on it, Jo
Yeah.
Ling, is that if DeepSeek is real, if you take it as real, and by the way, there are a lot of very serious techies who looked at it and are not disputing the elements that we've laid out here. Like that, it isn't like, hey, this is bullshit. It's like, okay, I'm going to take this as if it's real and true, and then we're going
Yeah.
to respond.
Right.
The problem is that everyone's incentives, and using Stargate, it's a perfect example. So Trump comes up and says, hey, we're going to spend $500 billion on AI, compute infrastructure, and win the AI arms race with China. Now, it turns out that of that 500 billion, most all of it had already been committed by various tech companies. So Microsoft it was 80 billion of the 50 billion. I think they might have announced the 80 billion even before. So what they did is they said Microsoft's good for 80 and Meta's good for some number, and then Alphabet's good for some number, and then they glued all the tech companies together and said together it's 500.
It's 500B.
Yeah, it's 500 billion. And what's happened is the market has rewarded everyone who's in that group, and Nvidia for sure, and some of the companies that produce the server farms and everything else. Like there's like, I mean, 500 billion is a lot of money. I mean, like it's literally changing the landscape. And what no one is in position to say, but I'm beginning to have this sinking feeling,
What?
is like, hey guys, it could be that we're not going about this the right way. That like this money might not be well spent, and that we're not sure. But the thing is, everyone's incentives now are around the spend. Because if I, the tech company, announce that I'm spending 20 billion on AI, my market cap goes up by 100 billion, and then
Right.
I go to Nvidia and give them like billions of dollars worth of orders like that. There's like this giant arrow heading in a particular direction. And it reminds me of some other times in my life. I'm a little bit older than you.
Thank you.
No, 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 no.
No, but does this remind you of like what was it like the tech bus? Like, is it the same sort of like money for money's sake without evaluating like why are we committing this much money to something?
This feels like it's being driven by money, to your point. Like that like this, or
It sounds like it to me. It's like funny money.
Yes. What you've kind of disregarded the laws of business physics that sometimes apply. I think Tim O'Reilly called this super money, where you can't compete with super money when it starts going.
Well, especially when it comes out of the White House, right? Like when it's, with such, in addition to like the incentive in the markets to spend more, to make more, it's also like, you have a president who has this very unique and very powerful hold on these billionaire founders, inauguration case in point, and I'm sure much more behind closed doors. And so it's like all of these factors are coming in, plus like, what is the Trump influence like with the U.S. China relationship on DeepSeek and this kind of stuff?
It's
like,
true. Because the numbers have gotten to this scale, like it's definitely now started interacting very directly with government. You had a bunch of the tech CEOs at Trump's inauguration, and some people are like, "Oh, that's terrible." My opinion is that these tech CEOs are just pragmatic and being like, like if it had been Kamala, they'd be standing there too. Like if they were asked to. I mean, I don't know if Kamala would have asked them to. I think Trump asked him to because Trump just likes the sense of, it's like, see, I've got these guys, and it's like all the money in the world, and we're like, I mean. And then, and if you're in their situation, you're like, all right, I guess I'm going to. I mean, some of them might be more into it. Like
I would argue some of them are more into it.
I mean, some of them are definitely more into it. Some of them are just, in my opinion, it's like, well, like whatever.
Yeah, you can read those facial expressions in the room in the rotunda. You could see who was there for the, I was called to be here and stand here versus like, I am here to play ball. for sure.
Yeah, you're right. There's a mixed bag. But at this point, the scale is so large that it's like, look, I mean, we're talking about, I'm leading $1 trillion company. We're going to, invest hundreds of millions in this stuff. And then government's going to be there to help me. And, there'll be other resources flowing. It's all heading in a particular direction. And to me, like the reckoning that DeepSeek represents is like the fact that Nvidia stock went down and then I think has mostly recovered since then.
Yeah, it's bounced back. I'm not sure the exact numbers here, but
It's largely, I think, recovered. And people aren't questioning the fundamental story. But so when I was referring before, it's like, hey, I'm a little bit older or whatever. I do remember the tech boom and bust of the first bubble, 2000. I started my first company in 2000 and NASDAQ was 5,000, went down to 2,000. But there was that period when anything with a .com in it and said, hey, internet, pets.com, e-toys, like you name it, would just go and then they'd get driven to the moon. And there were elements of the story that were very real and true.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the revenues didn't match up for a particular time. Like, there's like a time horizon. That's what this reminds me of too. It's like, if you ask me, hey, is AI real? Oh yeah, AI is very real. Is it going to change a lot of things? Yeah. Like, are we ahead of it? Yeah, we're ahead of it by a lot. Like, like, do the numbers make sense? Maybe eventually, but like, you'd have to project a lot out into the future. So I talked to a professional investor friend who was sizing this stuff up and asked him for his take. And he was like, he just cut to the chase, but was like, are we short Nvidia? Yes, we are.
Like, okay. Now we know.
That's where he went, which means
that
he thinks it's overvalued. He thinks other things are overvalued too. And I was like, oh, because I respect this person's opinion. I was like, I have that sense that that like the fundamentals have kind of become disconnected or unrelated to a lot of what's happening in this space. But when this heads in a particular direction, no one wants to stand in its way because, like, who the heck, for people who weren't around for the first .com boom and bust, like the echo of it in a different sector was the mortgage busts circa 2008, where there were people looking up being like, hey, some of this stuff doesn't make much sense. But it's like, what are you going to
do? Just lose your home. No big deal. I mean, it's what's interesting about the comparison too, is if you look at the companies that did survive the tech bust, right? It's such a small percentage. And so if you do that, just rough mathing, right, to how many AI companies, how much they're making, the incredible climb they've had, there will be several AI companies that come out like winners and infrastructure, and they'll provide that foundation, right, of like AI going forward. But it is like, the big question is like, every single company is trying to turn itself into an AI company to take advantage of this premium and this sort of like ride to the moon. And it's like, it's not, the laws of financial physics don't really work like that.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends who raised money for AI companies and raised a lot of it at a very high value.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like a year ago, it was like if you were an AI company doing like AI pets, right? You could probably make, easily raise around.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. I have always been in search of the perfect mattress. Sleeping something you do 8 hours a day on a good day, and it's a third of your life. Plus, it can make you healthier, more energetic, more productive. I'm a little bit of a productivity fiend, honestly. And so I was so excited to finally find out about Helix mattresses, the best mattress in the biz. Don't just take my word for it. GQ wired my kids. I took the sleep quiz at helixsleep.com and got matched with a Dawn Firm mattress that has been a game changer for me. I wake up refreshed, ready to take on the day. I kind of need a firm mattress. It's not Evelyn's jam so much, but it is mine. And I gotta say, it has been worth every penny. Every moment I'm on this mattress makes me actually feel like I made a good life decision. Helix Sleep can give you that feeling every single morning when you wake up. Don't take my word for it. Go to helixsleep.com/yang for 20% off site-wide plus 2 free dream pillows with mattress purchase. That's helixsleep.com/yang for 20% off site-wide plus 2 free dream pillows with mattress purchase. helixsleep.com/yang. So that's like the sense of the era that we're in, and the fact that DeepSeek now isn't available in the U.S. I feel like it kind of was this comet and shows up and is like, wow, like we're here, we're open source, we're free, and then everyone's like, and it's gone. But I mean, but it's not gone. I mean, it's being used by millions and millions of people in China.
And do you think, Andy, then what Kai-Fu Lee had originally said then last year, like a year ago, like last March, holds then? Like, are we going, or can we never go back to sort of like two systems in one universe?
I think that we're going to end up in two parallel AI universes. There's going to be the China sphere and the US sphere. The problem for the US companies, though, is that as far as I can tell, China's going to be able to underprice by a lot. Because if I've got a company that spent $100 billion and then I need you to pay for it, I'm going to price it very differently than if I spent $10 million.
And not to mention, if you add on to the fact that like a lot of these companies are heavily government subsidized, right? Like, and in the same way that the e-commerce companies were, subsidized and supported by the government too.
But by the way, I mean, the Chinese were forced into this position because the U.S. tried to cut off their supply of high-powered chips, though they did get their hands on some. But one of the things that popped into my mind during this process, Jo Ling, was just the phrase "necessity is the mother of invention." That the U.S. tried to box out Chinese firms from being able to make advances in AI, being like, haha, like, we're going to try and cut the chips, the chip access off to you. China does have access to its own data. So, I mean, they have more of it, and also it's centralized. But they pushed the Chinese into a situation where the Chinese had to figure out some kind of hack and, and reverse engineer.
Build their own.
Yeah, build their own on top of GPT's model. It looks like, and so one of the jokes I had, aside from that they're 12 hours behind us in AI, was, does it really shock anyone that the Chinese figured out how to build something cheaper? It's been kind of their jam for like quite some time, and they're also very unmindful of intellectual property rights and and that stuff. I mean, they'll just lift it if they can. And in this case, this is the ultimate.
Unmindful is a great choice of words.
but this is the ultimate irony, is that the AI companies also just frankly appropriated most of this data, from us, hundreds of billions of dollars worth. And then they managed to build these like mega enterprise, mega moats. And then the Chinese have essentially done the same thing to their handiwork. And then they're in this really weird position where it's like, oh man, well, that stinks. And you're open source. Oh man. Because some of the techies originally were like, oh, we should do this open source, but then you can't charge billions of dollars if you're open sourcing it. And so it's like, maybe we won't open source it. maybe we're going to use it. This is why Elon's so mad at Sam Altman, is because OpenAI started out as something that was supposed to be kind of, for the commons or whatever, and was a nonprofit. And then they converted for profit. But then it turns out that like the money for money's sake, it's a very American story. I feel like it's just someone saw this and was like, oh, like, money to the moon. And then so now they're in this weird position where it's like, okay, we spent gajillions of dollars. You have an open source competitor over there. So let's try and shut the door, ban it. Really, like right now, I feel like they just shoved the genie back to China and was like, okay, like let's pretend that didn't happen. Just keep on investing and digging and building and spending.
And keep doing what we were doing and maybe not acknowledging the lessons that have been learned here.
That's my strong feeling. That's my take. And so when you've been talking to people and they've run the gamut, like what have the conversations been like? Because you have contacts here, China, everywhere.
I think most of my conversations of late have been like U.S. sources, people who are in tech companies or around tech companies and, investors and stuff like that. And I think that there is like a couple schools of thought. I mean, we've talked about some of it already, but there's this sense of like, okay, like let's make it cheaper. So it makes it easier for people to develop stuff. So there's another option. It's good competition, all ships rise in the end. But there's the surveillance aspect, of course, like the NatSec folks are like, okay, in the same way that people were talking about Xiaohongshu, a Little Red Book,
Oh yeah, that's
TikTok
crazy
thing
too.
happening.
That was
Yeah,
nuts.
like totally crazy. I mean, in fact, I can tell you 3 different people who have told me I would never use Little Red Book on my actual like iPhone. I have like a burner phone, and these are tech people, right? So like a burner phone to like do that because they really do believe that there is a national security, threat of some kind regarding our personal data. So it's, when you think about DeepSeek, it's like if you think about it from the investor perspective and like your skepticism about how much money AI can make, that's one big pot of questions. But the other one is really like, what, how much do you give up when you're dealing with a TikTok or a Little Red Book or a DeepSeek? And like, what are some of the things that the U.S. government ought to be doing in this new administration to actually protect people who care about those kinds of things? Because I think increasingly, so many people just like, you just download the app, you agree to the terms, and like most
Oh,
people, like
100%. Like
who
no one
cares?
reads
Who
that
cares?
stuff.
Like it's just like I just want to use the thing that I'm addicted to. And so there doesn't seem to be there's obviously an outcry in Washington on this front, and there's, the legislative proposals and things like that. But what I'm waiting to happen, and I don't know if it will in 2025, is will there be like a consumer driven shift in like how we use things and like especially like social media and AI, because once you know what is being collected, do people care? I would argue most people don't care
Yeah, I agree.
because they still use it. But if there's an increasing national security threat and the geopolitical environment, hardens and there's more like borders and lines drawn, so to speak, then do we care more? Do lawmakers care more? Does that enforcement mechanism then affect how people consume stuff on their devices? Like, I just wonder if 2025 is going to be the year of like a little bit of a tipping point on that front. I don't know.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies, and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's EXPRESS vpn.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more. So here's the stuff I'm hearing is that there are some consumers that I know, like regular people, who are now trying to turn off Amazon Prime because they're pissed at Bezos, or that they're trying to get rid of Facebook or Instagram because they're pissed off at Zuck. Like that.
Right.
Now there's like an anthropomorphization of these tech companies, where now Zuck equals Meta, and it's like, oh, I'm mad at Zuck about something, so I don't.
Yeah, and they saw him at inauguration, like all these simple little pieces.
Yes. It's something as simple as that. So, I think that there are some people making consumer-based decisions about some of those tech companies, but the single biggest emblem of this has been TikTok, and I mean this was bipartisan, and a bunch of legislators came together and said, "Hey, this is a problem. It's our kids' data, their brains. We need to find a U.S. buyer, or this thing is going to be banned." And then I'll tell a story too, Jo Ling, because like I'm on TikTok. I mean, I have a TikTok account with 400,000 followers. I'm not like I don't consume. I'm happy to report. I'm not like sitting there watching videos all day.
That's what you say. That's what you say.
Yeah. But well, what happened was I have a staffer who runs my account and said, "Hey, do you want to put out a farewell to TikTok message? Because a lot of people are putting that out when it's being banned." And I was like, "No, because I do not think it's going to be banned." And then the person asked why, and I said, "Number one, it's because all of these people who are on TikTok are super pissed, and our political class really they have no backbone. It's like if people are pissed at them, they're like, oh, okay, okay, like
Yeah, yeah.
like even if I did vote for that legislation, like let's make you happy because I don't like people mad at me." But the other thing I thought was that it's a massive bargaining chip for Trump. Like if they actually just turned it off and banned it, then and then Meta had its like TikTok replacement, probably called Instagram.
Yeah,
um,
reels.
then Trump doesn't get any bargaining power or money from that. But if he doesn't ban it and it's out there and he's like, hey, I'm going to find a buyer, maybe like create the sovereign wealth fund, then there's money in it for him, or at least power. And so he'd prefer that path because it's just purely transactional and like it's not about like privacy or kids' data or their mental health. So I was like, they're not banning it. And it turns out that I think I was largely correct.
Yeah. Well, it was essentially like a way to get President Trump into the zeitgeist of a bajillion TikTok users, right? Because that error message that came up was like, oh, I screen grabbed it. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was like President Trump is like working on this, right? And then like a few hours later, TikTok is back. So it's like, it all seems like it's just like a show, in a sense of like power or of,
What's interesting though, Jo Ling,
perceived power.
is that the legislators were sincere. I think when they passed the ban, they were like, "This is a
Yeah, of course.
problem. We're going to ban it." And then,
And remember who started all of this? Who started all of this? Remember the first, no one, the funny thing to me, and even as a journalist, like our brains are so full of information, things are coming so fast and furious and it's crazy right now. But like the first Trump administration, it was all about the TikTok ban towards the end of the first 4 years. And so it is just wild to me that you fast forward, you've got President Biden for 4 years now, President Trump is back, that this is being done again. It comes as no surprise, of course, but like, it's just fascinating how short our memories are when it comes to, something that is so essential to so many people's lives, like social media, right? Like this all began during the first Trump administration.
wow,
And
time flies.
then I'll never forget this. Trump was like, yeah, we gotta like get rid of TikTok. And so I'm reporting on all of this. And at some point, like some other major world event happens and it's like the Trump DOJ or was the FTC or some, they kind of go quiet on me. And I'm like, and I was talking to sources inside, TikTok and ByteDance. And I was like, forgive me if this is a silly question, but did they forget that they just initiated this entire situation and all of this legal battle? And the other side, TikTok and ByteDance, they were just like, we are not getting responses from the U.S. government anymore. So it's like at the convenience of President Trump, it appears that this entire controversy ebbs and flows.
Well, you were referred to a Little Red Book, and that there was this moment when people thought TikTok was going away, when people were switching to Little Red Book, even though that's very natively Chinese. I mean, even
Yes.
like the name is based on Mao's Little Red Book.
Right.
And there were a bunch of Americans who were jokingly like, I pledge allegiance to the Little Red Book. It just goes to show how little people care about who's getting their data, like the national entities. It's like as long as I get my
or whether or not they can even be understood by millions of people who use that current app. Like I had so many friends who they were posting and they were getting like comments in Mandarin. They'd screenshot them because I didn't put Little Red Book on my iPhone, and they'd screenshot it, text me, and be like, "Joe, what's this say? Translate it for me." And I was like, "Oh, this really is like people don't care. They just want to be seen."
Yeah.
Is that it? Like,
Yeah, it's just plugging into their brainstem,
Yeah,
where you get dopamine hits
totally.
based upon responses. I'm really glad I was a functional adult before all this stuff came along. Feel for the
Oh my
kids.
gosh. Yes.
I'm sure you'll keep your girls away from it for a while. Anxious generation and all that.
It's all very, very intimidating to me though, because I feel like the more you know about it, the worse it weighs, like the heavier it weighs. But I agree. I think most Americans do not fundamentally care who has their data or where it goes, because we have been conditioned as a society to just release it. Like, think about all of the credit card breaches and all of the payment breaches over the years. Like, there's some crazy stat out there that is like, the vast majority of Americans have had their private information hacked, right, and stolen in some way, not just Equifax or the Target hack or whatever. It's like, it's out there. So it's like, I would, most people probably just like, well, it's already out there. Like, what
Yeah,
are
it's
they
a
going to
fact
get
of
from
modern
me?
life, and you hope it doesn't rise to the point where you have to change your credit card, or you show up to your website and they're like, "Hey, you might want to change your password," and you're like, "Oh God!" Like,
Yeah.
like I said something has happened here if you're asking me to do this. Thank you so much for helping us dig into issues that I get asked about all the time, and it sounds like you do too. I know that you're hanging out with the family right now, but if someone wants to keep up with you and your work, how can
Oh
they best
yeah.
do so?
Yes, I will be back on the air at CBS News in the second half of March, and I'm on social at Jo Ling Kent across all platforms. But always good to be with you, Andy Yang. I don't know what I should be
Whatever you
calling
want,
you
Jo
these
Ling,
days.
whatever you want. But congratulations to you on your work, on the family,
Thank
on
you.
everything. It's kind of awesome to see how far you've come, how far we've all
Oh,
come.
thank you. I mean, wow, things have really. We've all been through a lot, and it's crazy to think that I probably first met you in 2013 or 14.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, I think that's right. I was
Oh,
certainly a
so
normal human then.
happy 10-year friend anniversary or
Yeah,
something.
drinks on me next time I see you.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to chat with you. I always love hearing your perspective and what all your listeners are saying about what the heck is going on right now.
Thank you, Jo Ling. Come back anytime.
Oh, thank you. I will. Thanks.